Good day, welcome back. Today I'm continuing my series on corresponding squares. The first video I did in this series was a bit of a taster to whet your appetite in terms of what corresponding squares are. I gave a broad picture of what they are, and I went through this analysis of a relatively simple position involving a single pawn and sort of showing the steps in mapping the corresponding squares and how you use that in your play and analyzing whether positions are wins or losses and so on. Now, what I want to do now in the rest of this series is look at it in a bit more specific detail, like the procedures you have to do as a part of the process of the step-by-step analysis by corresponding squares. And I think I sort of use the analogy of like an algorithm, and it really is like an algorithm. Certain steps you do, and you can sort of, come to the outcome and of understanding the position more clearly. So, first thing we need to do when we're looking at a pawn position is to find the key squares, right? That will be step one. Now let's just remind ourselves what we defined a key square as. A key square is a position given a pawn structure. If the white king is on that key square, position is winning, no matter where the black king is. So just looking there briefly at the thumbnail, you can see those three stars in front of the white pawn on e6. So that's d7, e7, and f7 are the key squares for this this pawn position. Now that we've got the idea of what a key square is, what I'm going to do, the rest of these is going to be quite elementary, I guess is the right way of saying it. I'm just going to look at all the king and pawn versus king endgames from the white side, and just map out the key squares in the different positions we're looking at. I mean, once again, my source material here has been a very good page in Wikipedia, but I mentioned 3 books last time. Endgame books and pawn endgame books will definitely have these types of positions on them. Now, this is sort of stuff grandmasters, I guess, learn in the womb. So it's pretty straightforward. I mean, if you're very comfortable with these corresponding squares, maybe I suggest you can actually skip towards the end where I've got a couple of nice graphics sort of summarizing all the key squares in these king and pawn endgames. I mean, otherwise, what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly step through about 12 positions, and it should be fairly clear after that. You should be more comfortable how you identify the key squares quickly in more complicated pawn end games than these ones. So what I'm going to do is I switch across to my chessboard, this Kid vs PC, and I think you've seen it before. I've got this script called probe run. Actually, I'll just go into one of the files just to sort of give you an idea of what I'm doing here. Up the top, you can notice there I've got a list of pawn structures, a pawn a7, pawn b7, pawn d7, and so on. So what I do is program 0 is the first one, pawn a7. What my script does, feeds that pawn position in, creates a fan effectively, and then consults the syzygy endgame endgame table base, and it says put the king on certain squares and then put the black on any other square, and if it's always a win for white, then it's a key square. So with that sort of said, now we can sort of look at them. So I do probe run 0. That's the first position, and you can see that has created a position with a pawn on the a7 square. Remember, I do 2 charts here. The one that's relevant today is this one. Key squares for a pawn on a7 is the white king has to be on b7 or b8. We'll look at that in the main board in a second. And the second chart is if black is on either of those dollar squares, then he can draw with best play. Right, so this position, and it puts the king in a couple of random positions. Now, I think we can see it's fairly clear here, right, that I'll just move the king away. The white king gets up under what we've sort of specified as the key squares, these 2 squares here. Then the king is going to shepherd the pawn through, and there's nothing black can do about it, right? Now, the important thing here to note or to remember is that is the only 2 key squares for this position, right? Because what happens, I think you'd be familiar, if the king's in the corner, then the black king can trap the white king in the corner, and if the white king is, for instance, there, well, then the black king could already be in the corner. The white king has to be on b7, b8, to guarantee that position is a win. So they're the key squares for a7, right? So we'll just try and do these reasonably quickly. So the next position I look at is the pawn on b7. So let's do the same thing. I'll just paste that fan in. So this position we're talking about, check. Now, key squares here. once again, I think this is fairly straightforward, right? If your king's on any of those positions, then he's just going to shepherd the pawn through b8 and get a queen, right? So that's the key squares for that. I mean, these key squares with the advanced pawn are fairly straightforward. Go to the next one. Base defend and save. This is so what I've done is an A pawn and a B pawn because the knight's pawn has some sort of special cases, exceptions, and a central pawn. So here it's going to be those squares. Once again, if the white king is any of those squares, the pawn will be shepherded through. So now we can move to more interesting positions. Six pawns on the 6th rank, right? So let's put that position on the board. And you can see that the key squares are the same. Those two squares, right? Anything else won't work. For instance, if the white king was on b6, just highlight that, then the black king could be there, oscillating backwards and forwards. No way of driving the black king out of the corner, so that would be a draw. So what you're left with is that only b7, b8, once again, are the only key squares. This is the theme we'll actually see with the rook pawn all the way back. It doesn't matter how far back you put the rook pawn. It's got to be b7 and b8 because you've just got to keep the black king out of the corner. That's the only way you can do it. Now we move on to the pawn on the 6th rank. Knight's pawn on 6th rank. So you can see the indicated squares here are quite a little bit different than we're going to see in a lot of cases. Reason for that is that if the white king is on c7 or c8, there's actually stalemate traps, which you've got to be aware of sometimes. It won't always be stalemate, but imagine, let's see if we can construct that position. Stalemate. Right, so you've got to avoid that, and that's why c7 and c8 aren't key squares, but the 4 squares in the corner are key squares. c7 and c8 are often are wins for the white king, but they're not key squares in the sense that it's just guaranteed to be a win because you can stalemate the black king as I've just shown. Right, so let's keep moving on. So a d pawn on the 6th rank. So we're going to, surprise, surprise, it's going to be this block of 6 squares, right? White king on any of those 6 squares, guaranteed win. Now, you might be wondering about squares like c6 and e6. They are a win in some positions, and it's very important to know when they are a win. Normally, you can think of if you're being those squares and you can push a pawn without check, then it's probably a win, but that's not going to be all cases. So that's why in this position, you've got to be in front of the pawn and on one of those 6 squares, and then you can shepherd the pawn to the queening square. Keep moving as quickly as possible. Okay, rook's pawn once again. I said this situation where the key squares remain b7 and b8. Sole purpose, locking the black king out of the corner squares. So that doesn't change. Of course, I mean, I'm ignoring situations like this where I just move just for humor, right? Well, I'm ruling out situations where the pawn can be captured in a situation like that. However, that may be the game position, so you should certainly take that into account when you're considering your key squares. Okay, so we have a pawn on the 5th rank. So knight pawn on the 5th rank, and this is where you need to sort of know that basically you just need to get onto any of the squares in front of the pawn. a6, b6, c6. Opposition doesn't really matter. Now, this position black to move. If black moved up, black would draw. So I'm just going to move black to the side. So now let's say white didn't take the opposition, but we've taken a key square. So you'd think, well, black can take the opposition. Doesn't help. In this situation, just press the pawn. Black has to move back to b8. You push the pawn. Remember what I said? You push the pawn without check. So now black has to cede ground. That's the only square you can move to. And now you move the king up. And you'll be able to queen next square. So that's even winning without the opposition. Let's say you did have the opposition. then let's take the opposition, right? Black moves to one side. I'll keep it simple. Black moves to the center. There's some stalemate tricks if he moves in the corner. Just be aware of that. And once again, now shepherd the pawn to the queenie square. Right. So if we go back to this position here, they were the key squares. Right. Now the next, let's move on. We're going to see this pattern in the next position as well. So let's just paste that pen in. Save. Doesn't matter. D5 pawn, then the key squares C6, D6, and E6. You get on those key squares, you'll be winning. So it's black to move. Black would do something stupid like that. Let's say take their position, black moves away, and you, having forced the black king to the side, you are now able to promote your queen. So remember that if your pawn's on the 5th rank, then the key squares are the 3 squares immediately in front of it. Now, let's keep on moving. So now we're looking at a rook's pawn on the 4th rank. So obviously it gets more and more difficult. The further back the pawn is, the more work white has to do, and actually the key squares become a little bit more precise. But this one's the same. It's just going to be key squares, b7, b8. Got to keep the black king out of the corner. Now we're going to look at a knight's pawn on the 4th rank. This is the first time we're going to see the, let me just pieces out of the way. Squares are now moved 1 row forwards. Yeah, don't forget that. Now the reason for that is that if you are on these squares, if black does take the opposition on these squares, then white can't move forwards, black just mirrors white, and the only way white can make progress is by pushing his pawn in front, or basically in front or beside the king. And once you've done that, your position becomes, you can't win anyway, because you'll see a key thing here in all these charts, just look in this chart here, is that if the black king can sit in front of a pawn, then with best play, it's a draw. So you've got to keep that in mind all the time, right? So in this case, the key squares are these 3 squares, 1 full row in front. Now, we'll just demonstrate how that works. Move the king here. Let's say the white king has the opposition. You have the opposition a little bit easier because, you know, you just force black to give ground, you go the other way, and then now, once again, in time to promote your pawn, right? But let's say you didn't have the opposition. So go back to this position. I will just on purpose move black as the opposition. So what's the winning trick here? You got the extra tempo move. Now black has to concede, and once again you just push black off to the side, right? So we'll see that pattern again with the pawn on d4. Let's just paste that in, right? Key squares, those 3 squares, and exactly the same thing, right? So if white has the opposition on the key square, can push the black king aside, and if white does not have the opposition, so let's do it this way, let's do it a little bit smarter. Okay, well, black can go there, white can go there, black can go there. So black has the opposition, but you know, white can maybe move his king first, and then tempo move, and now black has to go that way or that way, and white will go the other way. So there we go. That's the key squares for the 4th rank. Now you can go further back and further back. There's the rook pawn one. Let's look at the knight's pawn one. So the key squares, you're going to need a tempo. So once again, the key squares here on the 4th rank. I won't go through it, you know, exactly the same process. So you can see how that works. If white has a territorial advantage, effectively he has his pawn on the 5th rank or above, then he doesn't need the opposition. He just needs to get those key squares. Whereas In this case, the key squares are 1 square forwards because white needs the opposition to force the black king away. So I've done. Okay, here we go. So there is all the positions I've just shown you. Right, this is the rook pawn with the key squares. B7, B8, rook pawn, rook pawn, rook pawn, rook pawn. Doesn't change, as I said. Of course, if black's in position, maybe you can take the king. And now we go the knight's pawn, those sort of 6 squares around it. Go back to the 6th rank. There's some stalemate tricks, so the key squares are actually only the 4 in the corner. And as you go further back, it's just on the 5th rank, it's the key squares on the 6th rank, but you go back to the 4th rank, the key squares are still on the 6th rank. And then this one, once again, you can see demonstrates the fact you need a tempo move. And then for a central pawn or a C pawn or a D pawn, E pawn, F pawn, this is the structure. You got effectively the 6 squares in front, and then for the 5th rank pawn, you have the key squares directly in front, and then as you go further back and you don't have that sort of space advantage, then you need the tempo move. So that's for the white side of it, and I'll just quickly show you that other chart I was always showing with the sort of the key squares for black, in inverted commas, like he can draw with best player in those squares, right? You can see the rook pawn has to be in the corner, and then as the rook pawn goes back, more and more squares become available. C8 is normally regarded as a key square, but not in this particular position, because with the pawn there on A6, if there was king on B6, white could actually push his pawn, and the black king would be boxed out. But apart from that, you can see this larger and larger area. If black was on any of those squares, he could be guaranteed to draw. And then if you look at the knight's pawn, once again, you can see this structure where normally if the pawn is far enough back, any of the 2 squares in front of the pawn. And then if you finally look at the bottom row, you can see that the central pawn is exactly the same, right? Black's ideal position is the pawn immediately in front of the pawn. Right, so I hope that's been, I mean, it's been a bit basic, but I hope that's been informative. So that now you sort of, the first thing when you think about corresponding squares is what are the key squares. So the next video, we're going to move on to a number of like real sort of world applications for these particular simple king and pawn endgames. They happen a lot. You need to know how to play them correctly. I think one of the things I will be showing, there's a famous game between Glicker and Fischer, which had exactly a situation like this. You need to know the key squares, and from those key squares, you need to work out the corresponding squares. So we'll go through that in the next video. Thanks very much for watching.